Welcome to Galaxy Burn, the first and only Warhammer 40k podcast. Okay, it's just me today. No guest and no script. We're doing this raw. We're raw dogging the Warhammer 40k lore. Why go in with a sexual metaphor right away? Because we're doing Ian Watson's Inquisitor. If you know, you know, and you're already groaning. Maybe like in a frustrated way, maybe in a sexual way, because this book is notorious among fans. Like, really notorious. I mean, it's almost like 30, 40 years old now. It is literally the very first Warhammer 40k novel. There's plenty of fiction around before then. Short stories in White Dwarf. There's all the fiction in the Rogue Trader book itself. I think even some codexes were out at this point. But this was the first time someone thought to sit down and write a novel about all this stuff. And Ian Watson, he's kind of a veteran of the sci-fi weird fiction scene. He's been around a long time, and he was a veteran when he wrote Inquisitor. So he kind of got his start in the new wave of science fiction in the late 60s. If you go back to the very first episode, me and Eden, we spoke about this at length. The new wave of science fiction is a massive, massive deal in both, like, obviously in the science fiction world, because it gave us like huge writers, J.G. Ballard, Samuel Delany, Ursula Le Guin, like really, really great writers. And mostly it gave us Michael Moorcock, without whom we would not have 40k or D&D or Marvel multiverses or virtually anything. Like you really can't overstate, how everything would look completely different if it wasn't for this one guy, Michael Moorcock, and his magazine, New Horizons. So that was also where Ian Watson got his start, publishing short stories. So he moves on to do full novels and working throughout the 70s, 80s, but he never gets to the same point as your Delaney's, who's quite rightly regarded as like one of the greatest novelists of the 21st century. That's novelist full stop, not even in sci-fi. Your J.G. Ballards, your Ursula Le Guins, Philip K. Dicks, those kind of guys. He's never mentioned in the same breath as all those guys, and that's I haven't read enough of his stuff to know if that's warranted. Based on Inquisitor, probably they got him right in terms of where he should be in this whole thing. But he is a professional, multiple published writer. One of the things you are probably not going to know about him, but it's pretty significant, is that he wrote the story for Steven Spielberg's AI. Remember with little Haley Joel? Was it Haley Joel? I'm gonna Google this. AI film main character. I can never type when people are. Little Haley Joel. Yeah, he was it. Haley Joel Osment. It was David, childlike android. So Ian Watson wrote the stories for that, not the script, the story. So he basically wrote a treatment, like the book that the film was based upon. He did that. One of the executive producers on AI was Stanley Kubrick. You can't see, but I'm doing a Kubrick stare right now. I am. And I'm actually always doing a Kubrick stare on these. It's just where my microphone's positioned. I have to put my face slightly down, so I'm always doing Kubrick stare. So Ian Watson actually gave Stanley Full Metal Jacket, Full Metal Shining Kubrick, right? he gave Stanley Kubrick a copy of Inquisitor. Yeah, Stanley Kubrick, one of the greatest directors of the 20th century, maybe a bit of the 21st as well. Eyes Wide Shut, but I don't know when that came out. Yeah, he he read Inquisitor. And he actually said to Ian Watson, and maybe he was being polite here, that maybe this could be a film, be one of his films one day. Stanley Kubrick could have got Tom Cruise to play Jack Draco. So Ian Watson is not a minor figure, and the people who generally write Black Library novels tend to have a few publications behind them, and then go to be Black Library authors. It doesn't tend to be someone will write a load of really highly regarded sci-fi novels, then transition to Black Library. The exceptions to the rule being Dan Abnett, who's been around forever, has done a billion different things, invented Guardians of the Galaxy, and more recently Adrian Tchaikovsky, who's quite medium-large sci-fi author. A lot of space operas. I'm calling them space operas because there's a lot of spaceships on their covers. I assume there's operatic elements in there too. He wrote Gene Steeler's Cult short story, which was not the best. It was all right. So yeah, the idea of a big sci-fi writer coming to the Games Workshop franchise, the Warhammer franchise, and picking up the universe and running with it is not something that happens often. But the first ever Warhammer novel, that's exactly what they did. They found a well-regarded sci-fi writer, but obviously not one of the biggest in the universe at that point. Yeah, and they said, "Hey, here's our cool universe. It's got some fucked up shit in it. It's weird as hell. Do you wanna run with this? It's yours. You can do what you like with it. Here's a bunch of books." They gave him all the copies of White Dwarf and stuff, and he ran with it. Oh boy, did he run with it. So, Inquisitor, where do we start? Where do we start with this? Okay, so I'm going to do steel manning the plot here. So, it is Warhammer 40,000, it's 41st millennium. A Ordo Malleus Inquisitor by the name of Jack Draco is on the planet of Stalinvast with his entourage, his retinue, which includes a Grim, who is a squat or a kin. They didn't call them kin back in those days. They called them the less politically correct term squat. His navigator, Vitaly Gogol, who's a navigator, which I'll explain in a second, and a Ordo Calidus assassin named Melindy. Guess whose body they talk about the most. Melindy is female, incidentally. So, it's a pretty small retinue for an Inquisition for what they go on to be. Like in the Eisenhorn books, which are good Inquisition novels, Inquisitors can have whole armies behind them. They can own. Eisenhorn has a huge estate full of dozens of intelligence operatives and mercenaries, and he's a big deal. Whereas Draco has 3 people with him. Not a bad thing by any means. Yeah, it's just a slight change in law from what we're used to. So Draco has been sent to Stalinvast to kind of shadow a younger and more impulsive Inquisitor called Hark Obstipal. Pronunciations. So there's a Gene Stealer cult uprising on Stalinvast. Obstipal is kind of leading the charge at clearing it up, and Draco is basically just shadowing him. He's been given very few details on what his assignment is. Just go to this planet, look at this guy, and he does. Then he comes across a entity, deep beneath the hives on in Stalnvast. This entity is referred to as the Hydra. It doesn't look like a classical Greek Hydra. It's kind of a gooey, almost psychic jellyfish creature with lots of gooey tentacles. And most people can't observe it. It would be invisible to most people. But it attaches itself to people's brains and has some kind of like low-level psychic control of them. Like 99% of the time, these people are just going about their day. But if whoever's controlling the Hydra wants to control them, it can do. Then there's a Harlequin. Oh boy, is there ever a Harlequin. So there is a human who for some reason dresses like an Eldari Harlequin called Carnelian. And he is somewhere in the Inquisition. He's some sort of like associate Inquisitor. It's never really actually stated what he does or is. And he's incredibly annoying. He has this like weird very affected speech. And he draws Draco out into a big chase across the galaxy to find out more about the Hydra. And eventually they end up going first to the Eye of Terror, which was slightly differently portrayed back in the olden days, but still got some continuity there. Then to Earth, or Terra, to give it a more 40k name, where they actually meet the Emperor and have a big long conversation with him. He honestly gives like probably about 5 times more speech to Jake Draco in this one scene than has been said from the Emperor in the last 20 years. So, why obviously there's some lore stuff. Probably if the book was written nowadays, you wouldn't have them actually straight up just like chatting with the Emperor. There's some minor differences between how it is then and how it is now. But, it was almost 40 years ago. It's not a big deal. The reason this book has become notorious in the fan community, the sweaty, unbathed fan community, is the horniness. So, back in the olden days, Warhammer was initially conceived as a game for adults, probably adult men with developmental disorders, but adult men. Okay, so when you have a demonette of Slaanesh, way back in the olden days when there were lead miniatures, demonettes of Slaanesh were naked women with crab claws. They were nude. You saw their breasts, nipples, pubic hair. It was the 80s, full on bush. We hadn't invented shaving at that point. And I remember seeing, as a kid, opening up White Dwarf magazines, like really old ones I'd found in second-hand shops, and there was full bush, just big old muff. It's the 80s. It was still cool back then. And because it was for adults, and Slaanesh at that point was the sexy god of sex, and therefore its demons should be nude. There's some Slaanesh stuff in Old Inquisitor. Oh boy, is there. So the first, it must be 50 pages, it at least feels like 50 pages, descriptions of Melindy, the assassin girl, who is very, very free with her body, as I think the term is. She is very, she doesn't really care if people see her nude. So they're in like a hotel suite, and Draco and Grim and Vitali are looking at her as she stretches and exercises and puts on like a latex skin suit, and they're all thinking about how horny they are, and it's just that 50 pages. It's like Michelle Houellebecq or something. It's just, we get it, you guys, we get it. Hot girl is there, you horny, we get it. That it's very concentrated in those first what feels like 50 pages. It's probably more like 5. But oh boys, there are a lot. It really does not give up, want you to spend at least a sentence without thinking about how horny you should be. And I mean, modern Black Library novels are very sexless. And that's, something that is kind of accepted about the setting right now, and it works in some ways. We don't say it. I mean, Black Library Games Workshop don't say it outright, but the kind of ideal audience for Black Library novels as they stand right now are start with maybe 12, 13. Certainly you can read them as adults, and certainly you'll get a hell of a lot more out of them as adults, at least the well-written ones. I can't imagine even though the content is appropriate for like a 14-year-old, I can't imagine me at 14 would read Gaunt's Ghosts and get as much out of it, because it's about like 90% of the characters are middle-aged men. It's about families and being an adult and going and doing your job. So, but yeah, so it does seem really odd that sex and sexuality are so openly discussed in the Warhammer setting. It seems like it shouldn't be there. I think that's the reason people have such a hard time with this book, because we're seeing something we shouldn't see. It's like, they never swear in 40k novels. Shit is the worst word they could say, like Grok's shit or something. They can't say the F word or the C word or anything even more baroque. They change it to Fef in the Gaunt's Ghost books, for example, or frack or something. They do these silly future swear words. Like frack in Battlestar Galactica. And imagine if you picked up a book and some guardsman stubbed his toe and said fuck. It would be completely out of the blue, right? And there's literally no swearing in Inquisitor. At least maybe there's a few low-level cusses, but the sexy stuff, the sex stuff comes completely out of left field after a lifetime of reading regular non-horny Black Library books that are kind of PG-13 except for hideous gore. And I think the portrayal of Melindy, that is going to rankle people. I don't think it's as bad as people want it to be. I mean, certainly in the first part of the book, she is getting undressed, doing her stretches in the hotel. All the guys are looking at her. They're talking about her. They're talking about how horny they are. They all have various different approaches to their horniness. Their characters are revealed through the ways in which they are horny. In the same way, in a contemporary Black Library novel, you'd reveal character through violence. In this, they reveal it through different approaches to horniness. So Grimm has is young for a squat. He's only 50, but he has a very maternal feeling towards Melindy. He's like a kid who likes their school teacher or something. That's his feeling towards her. Vitali composes poems about her. He has a more adult very fey and way of relating to her. And Jack, he's obviously trying to he's been the leader, he's been an authority figure, he's virtually celibate. It's mentioned he's had sex once. He's kissed a girl once, and he still looks at her, and he knows what he is looking at, and he knows what he is feeling. But later in the novel, she does become more of a character. I don't just mean her backstory gets filled out. That's true of it's true of her and Jack. But she disagrees with people. She makes jokes. She does have a personality. She does. Obviously, she's not winning a Bechdel test anytime soon, but she still has a personality. She goes through things. She has an arc. That's a hell of a lot more than most female characters who are there just to be gawped at are going to get. Clearly, because it is a sci-fi novel written in the 80s, clearly there's sexual violence. Yep, always is, always will be. Never is in contemporary 40k, but a damn good thing too. Do not want them to get all grim dark in that respect, but yeah, there is was referred to as psychic rape goes on. I mean, it's basically tentacle porn. That was invented in this book. You didn't know that. But and that's I'm not going to be the first person to point out why using that as a trope in order to make your baddies seem badder and your goodies seem gooder is it just kind of sucks. It's just not good. And plenty of great writers have done it. I mean, Alan Moore is terrible for it. He's one of my favourite writers of all time. And a contemporary of Ian Watson too. There's plenty of great franchises and books and entertainment of all kinds that does that exact same thing. It's a generational thing. I think it's something that I think when you're writing now, it's not even a thought in most in many writers' minds that, how are we going to make this bad guy seem like he's bad? I know what he should do to the female character. That will make him bad. You can't just have him do other bad things. You can have him do this one particular bad thing. Writers don't think that way anymore. They've kind of been slapped on the wrist enough. It was the way they did, and that's not me going, things were different back then. They could have and should have known better. And there are plenty of women writers and women critics who were telling them to do better, and they weren't being better. So that's that. But tonally is where I think Inquisitor is the most different. I think more than the sex stuff, the tone and the imagery is where it seems on the surface to be very similar. You have the colossal hive cities. You have the cherubs swaying incense in censures. You have these like disgusting, almost half alive worlds in the Eye of Terror. There's a lot of weird sexual stuff in there too. I think it's the imagery that is going to be so rankling to people here. So I think a lot of modern I don't want to call it genre fiction because genres are so huge nowadays, and there's like Dahlgren by Samuel Delany is a sci-fi novel. It's in the sci-fi genre. It's not the same thing as a Black Library novel. I'm going to use the word pulp, and that's not a derogatory term at all. Robert Raff, who's a brilliant Black Library author, his handle on social media is Rob Writes Pulp, because he does. That's what he does. It's an honourable profession. It is an honourable man doing yeoman's work in the pulp mines. So, Black Library novels are pulp. The Star Wars Extended Universe are pulp. There are many crime novels that are pulp. Romance novels are pulp. They're not bad. They can often be very good, but it's a certain thing. It doesn't have to be in any particular genre, although you can't really do like pulp literary fiction. I don't know what that would be. It's like a college professor dates one of his students, but it's written kind of bad. But yeah, pulp doesn't need to be written badly necessarily. But it's not going to be written. It's not going to be written like Dahlgren. It's not going to be written like Ulysses. It's not going to be written by like Cormac McCarthy. Couldn't write pulp. He's worked in pulp genres like the Western and a crime novel, but his work isn't pulp. I can't pin down where the line is between pulp and other kind of writing, whatever that upper, not even upper, because I don't want to say there's a hierarchy here, but what that other kind of writing that includes anything from Ulysses to Solenoid to tons of stuff, and which can also be genre stuff. That there's a spaceship in Finnegan's Wake, you know. Where was I? Okay. The pulp genre has, over the time between Inquisitor coming out and sort of now, gotten very filmic. It's writers, like, say, the kind of writers you'd find in like Tor, being published by Tor publisher, have a very visual, very filmy way of writing. They want to conjure certain visuals in their heads. They want the dialogue to read like people are saying it. They're kind of like writing movies for you. And that's as true as 40k, for 40k novels. They want to show you those cool cutscenes from Space Marine 2. So they're doing it with words instead of with shaders or whatever games have. The New Horizons writers, the new wave of science fiction writers, they had a different way of showing things. They weren't as interested in writing movies with words as they were in exploring language and tonality and the way a character will sound on the page being different from say another character. So the way that every line of prose is written is going to be very different from what you'd find in a modern Black Library novel. So there's lots of exclamations in the text. There's lots of questions the reader. There's lots of dear reader, because the book is being written by a highly educated Inquisitor, like the upper middle class of the galaxy. So instead of just having a narrator that gets out of the way and tells the story and lets the movie happen in your brain, he is trying to show who a character is through the accumulation of significant details on the page and in every single line of text. That's probably very normal in like most literary work. That's what a novel is. It's what a literary novel is. You give a reader a bunch of different details, they put them together, they find a thing. A person, a place, an event, an idea is illustrated through a collection of details. And I think Ian Watson is writing in more closer in that style than he is writing in the I'm going to write a movie and you're going to see it in your brain by reading this book way. This cinematic way that a lot of Black Library stuff is written in. And the imagery he will use is not that like half CGI, deviant art, very polished, beautiful. Everything is done on computer, so every brush stroke is perfectly set where it needs to be. Things are almost manga influence, but also almost photorealist way. You're probably looking on a screen and seeing a picture like that now, because that's the style of Warhammer art today. That's what's on the front of the boxes. That's that's the feel of Warhammer in art today. And when you read a Black Library novel, that's what you're seeing. What Ian Watson is writing is a John Blanche illustration. Hopefully I'll have that on screen right now. It's not pretty at all. It, in fact, is ugly by any stretch of imagination. The colours are not right. They're often mostly browns or reds. They look like wounds. There's this almost like Ralph Steadman from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, the book, way of composing things. People don't have the right proportions. The Gothic elements are just blown up to just this insane extent where things are just hysterically Gothic. They're not just like a big cathedral, a cathedral but bigger, and it's a spaceship. Whoa. They're sickening. They're just like someone has got obsessive compulsive disorder about gargoyles. And that's the feeling that Ian Watson wants you to get out of this, because when Games Workshop handed him a bunch of White Dwarf and Rogue Trader books, that's the visuals in there. Just open up Rogue Trader. You can find a PDF online. You'll see the just like gross, weird, ugly visuals of it. Now go pick up your last Space Marine Codex, which I will do. Like the 10th edition Space Marine Codex, which I'm holding right now, has these very beautifully composed, almost photorealist, but also painterly shots of the Space Marines. They're properly lit. There's attention paid to the composition. It's very beautiful. It's very well done. There's a lot of talent, but there's also, just put this back on the shelf. There's talent, undoubtedly, but whoever drew the cover of the Space Marine Codex, I don't know, is that person drawing all of the codexes? Because all the codexes look exactly the same. All the art in the codex looks like it was done by one guy, or girl, or non-binary person. There's no individuality to it. And a lot of fans miss that. The Rogue Trader illustrations were ugly as hell sometimes. Not because the drawers were not talented, it's because they wanted to do ugly stuff. They were punks. They weren't interested in drawing a Space Marine well. Okay, they were interested in, okay, this is a 9-foot tall super soldier who's absolutely disgusting. Let's make him look disgusting and weird and threatening. On the screen right now, there's one of those genre of illustrations. I think this is even on John Blanche. Things are wrong. Like, things are the wrong size. People are ugly. There are scary monsters in New Warhammer art, but people aren't ugly. In fact, they often have this, especially when you're dealing with like Sororitas or someone, there's often this very anime-inspired waifu-looking things. Their eyes are just bigger for some reason. And that's the feeling that Ian Watson wants you to get out of Inquisitor. It is queasy and gross, and everything is just a bit nastier and weirder and more idiosyncratic than things are nowadays. I mean, plenty of weird, gross stuff happening in current Black Library novels. The Death Welder, the Victoria Hayward's recent one that came out this summer, has got a lot of like gross, goopy body horror about what it's like to be on a world that's been like literally digested around you, and that's great. But there's a feeling you get from early 40k and from Inquisitor that it's just really hard to pin down, but it is just gross and dirty and almost like some horrible nightmare. Just like, you know, when you wake up and you have this spiral of thoughts that make no sense. There's no coherence to any of it. It feels like that sometimes. There's a part of it set in the Eye of Terror. There's a lot of, I mean, a lot of the book is basically Jack Draco opens up his tarot cards, throws some tarot card down, and is like, I've figured out where the Emperor wants us to go next. Off on another adventure in this location. Here's a Space Hulk. Here's the Eye of Terror. Here's Earth. That if you like well thought out plots, there isn't one. There is if you don't like coincidence or characters being handed the resolution to the plot, you ain't gonna like this, because like, he doesn't overcome anything. He doesn't do anything from his like smarts or his skills. He throws some cards on a table, and because the cards are like psychoactive, they just tell him what he needs to know next. That's not particularly satisfying about it. Anyway, where was I? Okay, so they go to the Eye of Terror, and they go to this one planet that's not named, and it's like a Slanesh planet, I guess, and that means there are boob houses, big boob houses. There are penis houses that are penises. There are these, I mean, if you've seen the way old 40k models were, Jack and his friends are accosted by a bunch of Slanesh worshippers, and they are the weirdest bunch of freaks. I mean, they still have like weird and gross Slanesh people, but it'll be like they had leather stuff on and chains, and they were kind of weird and hellraisery. But in this, they're like giraffe people with weird boobs, and there's a Minotaur man, and there's a demonette, but she's not, and for some reason Vitaly Google gets obsessed with her and has to be put down. Oh no, he gets killed in the second book. This is not a spoiler, it happened 30 years ago, shut up. He gets killed in the second book by being impaled through the arse, through the bum, with a stinger from a demonette, like a scorpion stinger. Like I say, not normal stuff at all. I got this book when I was very young. Probably, I don't know exactly when, maybe 10 years old. You can call the NSPCC on my parents based on what I've just said. So I lived out in the countryside in a little place called Dorset. It's like a small town out of the country. There was like a newsagent or a magazine shop for Americans in the middle of the town, and that had White Dwarf magazine. And I would see it and I'd be like, oh my god, that's so cool, I want to read that. And I saved my pocket money, and I bought a copy every month. It was like set aside for me behind the counter at Abbey Bookstore on Sherborne High Street. And eventually I wound my dad up enough to make him take me to Bristol, the city of Bristol. Lovely place. And one of the, back then, quite few Warhammer stores, that were Games Workshop stores back in the day, was in there. And I got to like look at the models, and there was like a bunch of like, by today's standards, very like very naive looking like displays of models. Like paints weren't as good back then. There were only Citadel miniature paints, or you could like pick up some model paints that were made for like model aircraft, which I did, and my miniatures are like garbage. And I was kind of given was probably like, I don't know, 2 shillings and a pence, and whatever the money was back then. It was pounds. I'm not that old. And I was given some money. I bought Commissar Yarrick, who'd just come out at that time. He was in White Dwarf, and I was like, that guy's so cool. He's got a claw arm. He's got a Stormbolt, which you shouldn't even be able to carry. That's amazing. I love that guy. So I got him. I got Marnius Calgar sat on like his throne. He was a Space Marine commander at the time, but he was Marnius Calgar. And I got the book Inquisitor. And God knows why they sold it to a small child. But yeah, I remember taking it home, reading it, learning so many new words, and what different parts of girls did. And when I was reading it for the first time in many, many decades, just this last week, there were so many phrases and scenes that stuck out to me. That was like, oh my, that was from Inquisitor? Like, I've used that in my own writing. Oh my God, that's in this book? That phrase? That weird scene that makes me slightly uncomfortable but is also like compelling? That's Inquisitor? And yeah, it is. And probably a lot of better books I've read haven't stuck with me as much as this one. And that's, yeah, you can put that down to the fact I read it when I was 10. Not even pubescent at that point. Had no like sexual things going on. You know, I knew girls are cute, but I didn't know, like, you know, I didn't have any urges. But yeah, I read it, and it's still there in me many, many years later. Just like the coils of the Hydra are stuck inside people and they never leave. It's and I don't think I went to the library every week as a kid and bought like a little stack of whatever book is interesting me. I know a lot of I probably had like Neuromancer or something of that nature when I was like 10 or 11. And there were still bits in Neuromancer, for example, that I still remember. The sky was the colour of TV turned to a dead channel, all that business, you know. But I don't think anything has stuck with me quite as much as Inquisitor, because of that queasy, gross, weird atmosphere that really a child should not be exposed to. But I'm still here almost 30 years later, and still like my Warhammers. You know, this hasn't traumatized me, you know, like the way Gen Z people think it does when you see a boob when you're like 17 and 364 days old. It's still stuck with me. Yeah, it's still stuck with me. I don't think something written normally by a normal person with normal sexual feelings would have been stuck with me so long, to the point where it's almost like I can recite it. When I was reading it, it was like I wasn't even reading it because it was already there. Yeah. I mean, that's not a review of the book, is it? Like, I'm not telling you whether you should read this book. And in all honesty, you probably shouldn't. It's not well written. The story is bad by any standards. But I will say, because any talk of literature or art in general is purely subjective, it can only come from one place, and that's from me. This book, for all its faults, which are many, on every page you will find a fault with this book. For all its faults, it sticks with me in a way many much better books by much better writers have not stuck with me. Okay, like and subscribe, and you'll hear more about my awful life and weird opinions, and how I've ruined my brain with tiny plastic spacemen. Goodbye. Come back next week. Like and subscribe.